We'll have quite the showdown on Saturday between these two of three remaining undefeated teams when they meet. Number 7 Indiana and Curt Cignetti making that trip to face Dan Lanning and number 3 Oregon. Like I said, get your popcorn ready. Plenty of talent across the board, including the quarterbacks Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore. Both could help their Heisman case down the road, depending on how the outcome for either side there. But this is setting up for a good one on CBS at 3:30 Eastern time. Take a look at it to tell the tape between the two sides. It could be a shootout. Both teams ranked in the top 6 in the country in points and points per allowed. Oregon, by the way, the longest active regular season win streak at 23. Also the longest active home streak at 18. For the Hoosiers, though, they're 0-46 all-time on the road when it comes to AP Top 5 opponents, and they're seeking their first road win versus AP Top 10 since 1987, and that was number 9 Ohio State. Jeff Rabjohns and Erik Skopil here tapping in with us from 24/7 Sports to give us a skinny on Saturday, how that might this shake out here. But we'll get the ball rolling, and I mentioned the quarterbacks and signal callers because this might be an unofficial battle when it comes to the Heisman between Moore, Mendoza, and Erik. I'll give you the first word. What do you expect from these QBs?
Oh, I think it's the kind of the key point of this game is just these two quarterbacks. You look at it, a combined, I think, 30-2 touchdown interception ratio. Extremely productive. I was looking at Mendoza's stats. I think he had like 40 of 43 completions in consecutive games a couple weeks ago. Dante coming off, I think, a really impressive debut, really on the road against Penn State, and the way he was able to make plays down the stretch. Evade pressure, get the ball upfield to receivers. Make those kind of off script sort of plays. I feel like, this is, like you said, these are two of the Heisman front runners. And for one of them, they'll be making maybe a Heisman moment here that, when we look back in December, this will be some of what we see on their Heisman trophy reel.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, obviously, this is the headline matchup. The two quarterbacks, they're both Heisman Trophy level kind of guys. And I think the touchdown to interception ratio for both of them combined shows two things. One, they have incredible arm talent. They know how to get the ball to their key receivers. Both of them have multiple touchdown passes, 15-plus yards and 20-plus yards. But the very low number of interceptions shows you have arm talent combined with very, very smart decision-making. So decision-making is great. Arm talent's great. Put them together. You have studs like these guys. Mendoza is one of only 3 Big Ten quarterbacks since 2000. So we're talking 25 years with at least 3 consecutive games of at least 4 passing touchdowns. So Mendoza's impact on Indiana has been immediate and it's been significant, and he's going to be a big factor for Indiana. And he needs to play really, really well for Indiana to have a chance to pull off this big upset on the road.
Jeff, I'm curious because Mendoza has played at the stadium before on that side of the country. I'm curious, and maybe he mentioned that experience playing there. Would that play a part, or maybe not at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least a little bit because, he's been there. He understands how loud it is, how rambunctious that place is. And it's a great environment, as Erik knows me really well. It's an outstanding environment. The crowd makes it really difficult for opponents. I also think their most recent game at Iowa, it was loud there. They really weren't able to audible. So I think they've had not only the experience at Cal for Mendoza, but everybody as a group for Indiana kind of just went through the issues you had with crowd noise in their most recent game. So I think both experiences at least give this Indiana group and Mendoza specifically some opportunity to have gone through it and gone through it recently. Just helps you be a little more prepared. Doesn't mean Austin all of a sudden gets quieter, because that's not going to happen. But they've at least been through it.
And not to throw, I guess, cold water on this, but there may be cold water in this game. Like it may be a bit of a downpour, a little bit of rain on Saturday in the forecast. So we're here talking about these quarterback battles. They might have, I guess, another element to consider. And I think going back to that 2023 game when Mendoza came up with Cal, I think that was also a really wet football game. So just another thing to kind of throw on people's radar about the possible weather impacts here.
All right, Mother Nature could play a part, as you mentioned there. But, Jeff, I want to go back to Cignetti because the past 2 years, all he does is win. He told us that last year. And, again, we're seeing it this year when it comes to him and his group here. But if they were able to win here on the road, what does this do, not just for the record, but big picture, program down the road in the years to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it would do was it would stamp them unequivocally as a national level program, at least as they're functioning right now under Kurt Signetti. They are sitting there at 16-2. They did go to the playoffs last year. In Kirk Signetti's first year, they beat everybody that they played except for Ohio State and Notre Dame, the two teams who played for the national championship. So they put a lot of things on the resume. They're ranked top 10 in the AP poll back-to-back seasons for the first time in program history. But if you were able to go out to Oregon and win, that would be a signature moment. Because look, I mean, last year, Ohio State won the national championship. They lost at Oregon. It's an incredibly difficult place to play. Dan Lanning has done a phenomenal job, in my opinion, building the program, building it how he wants, putting playmakers just all over the field, athletes all over the field. We can get into the defensive line here in a moment, but for Indiana, it would be a program-defining win as far as where Indiana is right now in the national landscape of college football.
I guess just to turn to the Oregon side briefly, maybe there's a level of validation after how Penn State played last week in Pasadena. I've seen people kind of talk about it two different ways. Like, one, did Oregon kind of break this Nittany Lion team? How much of it was a hangover? Or two, does this devalue to a certain extent Oregon's resume, Oregon's big victory here? There's no opportunity with another top 10 team coming to Eugene.
Eric, I know you probably know this already when it comes to Dan Lanning. Like, his backbone is all about the defense, and we'll see that when it comes to Oregon's D-line versus that Indiana's O-line. Your thoughts on the battles in the trenches there?
Yeah, I think that was one of the big question marks going into that game a couple weeks ago in Happy Valley was how would Oregon match up against an offensive line that was experienced, that was veteran. I think coming into this one, it feels like the shoe's sort of on the other foot. I think there's maybe more questions about what Indiana can do in terms of protecting Mendoza coming off that Iowa game where maybe there was some up and down play. This is an Oregon defensive line that has kind of been put together this offseason. They lost 3 guys to the early part of the NFL draft a year ago. They did bring back Mateo Ungalele and Tatum Tuioti, 2 guys off the edge who've been extremely productive over their careers. But it's really been Amari Washington and Bear Alexander in the interior that have really kind of keyed the success recently, I think. Alexander, kind of an enigmatic figure, I would say, in this sport, pretty nomadic as well, played a bunch of different spots, kind of up and down success. He's really put it all together seemingly recently, played probably his best game, maybe of his whole entire college career at Penn State a couple weeks back. So it's a big athletic front. You talk about Alexander and Washington, those are a couple guys over 300 pounds. The guys they rotate in are 330 plus pound guys. So a lot of size in the up front for Oregon, and off the edge, some really explosive athletic pass rushers.
Yeah, like you're showing there in the graphic, both teams are top 6 in the country in points scored per game and fewest points allowed per game. Indiana's averaging 47.8 points per game. Oregon's at 46.6. Oregon's got certainly a more difficult road opponent there in Penn State, but Indiana also did have to go to Iowa, where very few teams actually score more than 20 points over the last couple of years. But I think the defensive line of Oregon versus the offensive line at Indiana, to me, that's the number one unit versus unit matchup to watch over the course of the game. Sure, both teams have a bunch of playmakers all over the field. There's a dozen plus guys who could really determine the outcome of this game. But as far as what I'm going to be really focused on throughout the course of the game, it's Oregon's D-line against IU's offensive line, especially the right side of IU's offensive line. That part of IU's offensive line had some struggles in their most recent game at Iowa, when Iowa kind of consistently brought house blitzes, some run blitzes, things like that. And if you look at the 2 teams Indiana lost to last year, Ohio State and Notre Dame, especially the Notre Dame game, Notre Dame's quick twitch on the defensive line was a big factor in that game. That really got IU's offense off schedule, kept them off schedule for most of the game, probably a healthy 3.5 quarters. And if you look at, some of the things that Indiana's done, I mean, they're unbeaten under Kurt Signetti when they have more explosion plays than the other team. Having more explosion plays than Oregon is a tall task. But Indiana's going to need some. They're going to need enough. And they've got guys out there who can really go out there and make plays. You look at Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper, they're one of only 2 FBS receiving duos with 15 or more career receiving touchdowns. Those 2 guys can be explosive, but to allow them to be explosive, got to protect Fernando Mendoza. So that's why I think Oregon's defensive line versus Indiana's offensive line is the key unit versus unit matchup to watch over the course of the 60 minutes of what we're going to see on Saturday.
So it starts in the trenches when it comes to both lines there, but also the QBs have to have success. At this point of the segment, I need to know who wins, and Erik, you have first word.
I like Oregon at home. And I know they're 7.5-point favorites. That line's come down a little bit from where it opened, which maybe shows respect to Indiana, or maybe an indication of what I was talking about earlier with the Penn State loss at UCLA and Pasadena there. I think the thing that's really impressed me about Dan Lanning during his time here is just the highs and lows. There just aren't really in there. They're kind of even keel as a program. And, they go into these big games and seemingly perform at a really high level consistently. I like them at home. Like you read the stat earlier, I think of just the lack of defeats at Autzen Stadium under Dan Lanning. There's only been one. And certainly Indiana is the type of team that could come in and spoil things. I think Mendoza is up there, like we talked about earlier on this, as one of the best quarterbacks in the country and probably going to be the most challenging out all season for this Oregon defense in terms of the quarterback play. But I like Oregon to win. I don't know if I like them to cover quite yet, but I think they improved to 6-0.
Yeah, I think Oregon wins the game. I think Indiana does have the weapons on offense to make it a run, to challenge Oregon. But again, Ohio State won the national championship last year, and they didn't win at Oregon. I think it's a really difficult task. I do think both guys, and Dan Lanning and Curt Cignetti, there is some Nick Saban in them as far as we focus on the task at hand. Obviously, Lanning was an Alabama GA in 2015. Curt Cignetti was an Alabama assistant and recruiting coordinator from 2007, 2010. They both have time with Saban, and there's some Saban-esque kind of things in both of them where moments don't get too big, they don't get too far ahead of themselves. But I think as far as the outcome of this game, I think Indiana has the firepower to give it to challenge Oregon, but I think Oregon has too much, and I think Oregon at home is so difficult to beat. I think Oregon ends up winning this game.
All right, double Oregon. Jeff, as I always tell the guys that go opposite the teams they're covering, you can no longer go back home. You might as well just stay there in Oregon with Erik. Appreciate it, fellas, as always. We'll see how that game pans out on Saturday. You know where to find it on CBS at 3:30 Eastern there. A top 7 matchup with Indiana heading that way. Curt Cignetti always win. We will see if that's the case there in Oregon. Number 3 in the land on Saturday on CBS and Paramount+.